Angela Bledsoe was a smart, ambitious, and accomplished financial advisor who was hired by James R. Ray III to work at his insurance brokerage firm. Before long, the two were doing more than just crunching numbers and became involved in a full-blown love affair that resulted in the birth of their daughter. However, the relationship between the two quickly goes south, leaving one of them dead and the other on the run, wanted for murder. Hello and welcome to The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love, and this week I'm putting a spotlight on the case I'm calling Two-Faced. Born on February 11th, 1974, Angela Bledsoe hailed from Maryland, the youngest of Ray and Gaynell Bledsoe's 4 children. Her sister Lisa LeBeau told 2020 that the family was middle class, church-going, and just the typical American family. Angela was an honor student and involved in student government. When it came time for college in 1992, Angela headed to Howard University and a major in the School of Communication. After a year, she decided to switch gears and, at the suggestion of her sister Lisa, enrolled at Florida A&M University, majoring in business. Angela thrived at FAMU, as it's known, joining the Sigma Delta Theta sorority and becoming deeply involved in campus life. In 1997, immediately after earning her bachelor's degree in finance from FAMU's School of Business and Industry, Angela headed to New York City to work as an analyst with Chase Manhattan Bank and later as an associate with JP Morgan Chase. Angela was making so much money, she was able to buy a brownstone in Brooklyn at the age of 27. Something almost unheard of. However, she makes the decision to change things up once again when in 2008, she meets James R. Ray III, an attorney practicing in New York City. He hires her to essentially run the insurance brokerage firm that he owns, as he wants to devote more time to his law practice. Brooklyn native James served in the Marines, spent 2 years as a New York City police officer, later getting an MBA at Long Island University and eventually a law degree at the University of New Hampshire. James's success buys him entree into the swanky township of Montclair, New Jersey, 12 miles west of Manhattan. Montclair is a quiet community with stately homes and gobs of money flowing through its tree-lined streets. In due time, James and Angela's working relationship turns romantic, and she is smitten enough and comfortable enough to introduce him to her friends and family. Angela's friend Jamila McCoy told 2020, quote, "You could see that they had a connection. They had a spark amongst themselves." While her mother Gaynell liked what she saw, telling 2020, quote, "Initially, I thought he was a nice individual for her." Angela had even told her mother that James was special. Something that did give people pause was the age gap, though not obvious because James looked pretty good for his age. But he was 11 years older than Angela, 45 to Angela's 34. Jamila McCoy told 2020 she was sure that James probably swept Angela off her feet, saying, quote, "He probably was extremely charming, which I'm sure is how he attracted Angela because I know Angela. He would have had to bring his A game to get her to even want to look his way." Angela's cousin Brooke Dean shared with 2020, quote, "I could see how James was charismatic, and he did have ways about him being funny, intelligent, things like that. So I think she looked at him as a catch." Brooke went on to say, quote, "They had a lot in common as it pertained to business. They had this power couple dynamic between them." So at first glance, despite the age difference, James and Angela seem like a great match. Driven, ambitious, smart, wealthy, Angela had shared with her family that she wanted to get married and have a family, and with all of his credentials, James seems to fit the bill. As Angela's friend Jamila McCoy told 2020, quote, "James looked great on paper." Well, that paper was a little messy. For starters, James had some notoriety. For example, he had ties to the court case involving Jelani Mirage, who is rapper Nicki Minaj's brother. Jelani had been accused of repeatedly sexually assaulting his 11-year-old stepdaughter, and James was hired by the victim's mother. Apparently, at some point, James testified that he had called Jelani's attorney and demanded $25 million to settle the case. I guess he figured that Nicki Minaj would go into her pocket to give her brother this money. At any rate, that is not what happened because the mother found out about this and she fired James over the clear, extortion attempt. And FYI, Jelani Mirage was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. James was also sued for sexual harassment by a paralegal who worked for his law practice, eventually settling the case for $35,000. It's likely that Angela didn't know any of this. And something she definitely didn't know, James is married. According to 2013 court documents from the sexual harassment case, James had been married to a woman named Cheryl for almost 25 years and had 2 adult children with her, Chelsea and James. The New Jersey Law Journal also reported that before marrying Cheryl, James had previously been married to a woman by the name of Leslie Renee Adams. Despite learning that James was married, Angela decided to continue the relationship. Her friends were surprised and confused that she had elected to stay in the relationship, though they surmised she was probably in too deep by that point. Her aunt, Deidre Hill, bluntly said to 2020 about her niece, quote, "Angie wore rose-colored glasses." Angela's friend Jamila McCoy agrees with this, saying, quote, "Love kind of blinds you to certain things and makes you more willing to overlook or give grace." For her part, Angela's cousin Brooke Dean shares with 2020, quote, "I was beginning not to like him, and I didn't like their dynamic together, and I was hoping it was a phase and it would go away. Well, the relationship is not going anywhere because Angela was pregnant. Angela goes through the pregnancy alone with James playing deaf, dumb, and blind, content to sit back and let her do everything herself. She gives birth to their daughter, Alana, in 2012. So Angela and Alana are in her Brooklyn brownstone while James and his wife are living in Montclair. It's only when his wife of over 20 years says, "Peace out, I'm not doing this anymore," and moves out of the house, is James spurred to say to Angela, "Okay, you and Alana move into the house in Montclair with me," which seems uncomfortable to say the least, living in another woman's house, but Angela makes the move to New Jersey in 2015. And clearly, she's hoping that he will put a ring on it. And after playing Where's Daddy at first, a switch flips in James, and he becomes a doting father to Alana, taking her golfing 3 times a week, and the whole family is making cozy nights at home, just the 3 of them. It all seems very idyllic, and like Angela's dream of a happily ever after might finally be coming true. Except this shiny, happy family was a total fraud. As Chris Keating of News 12 New Jersey mused to 2020, quote, "You never know what's going on behind closed doors." Amen to that. So now that Angela is with James day in and day out, the rose-colored glasses have thudded to the floor, and Angela does not like what she sees. James is controlling, jealous, totally paranoid, and blowing every little thing she does out of proportion. He sends her Bible verses about how women should be submissive to their man. He's also convinced that Angela is cheating on him. Former NewJersey.com reporter Julia Martin tells 2020 that Angela, quote, "complained about him to her family. She said that he was controlling. He would criticize her in front of their daughter." As NorthJersey.com reported, Angela's diary listed her frustrations and regret about the relationship, and she wrote that she desired a, quote, "mutual, loving relationship with a man who appreciates me, speaks to me in a loving voice, and does not argue with me in front of our child, who is not a dictator, who values my feedback and intelligence, and sees me as an equal in everything." For her part, Angela's cousin Brooke told 2020, quote, "the more she would share, the more his actions worried me." She even texted Angela to say, quote, "it doesn't sound like you're safe. It sounds like he's unraveling." Well, as it turns out, James was right about Angela cheating on him because, well, she was. So James got the code, sneaky guy, got the code to Angela's phone from their daughter, and he finds some text messages between Angela and a man by the name of Bakari Burns. So Angela and Bakari went to FAMU together, where they were friends, just friends, and then went their separate ways after graduation. They reconnected during a homecoming event at the university, and this time, sparks flew, and one thing led to another. So when James hacks into Angela's phone, he sees that Angela and Bakari are sexting with each other. They're making hotel reservations, calling each other baby, saying some other really filthy things, frankly, and there's just no way to explain this other than it's exactly what James thinks it is. So a seething James calls Bakari, who was a city commissioner in Orlando, and lays it out for the guy, saying, quote, "Do you know that I exist? Do you know that Angela has a daughter? Do you know that Angela lives with me and sleeps in my bed with me every night?" And he delivers a final chilling message to Bakari saying, quote, "I may be coming down to visit you in Florida." Besides learning that Angela was cheating, it seems that Angela had also told James that she was about to leave him in the dust. Michelle Miller, assistant prosecutor for Essex County, revealed to 2020 that Angela had sent him a text message letting him know she wasn't putting up with him one more day, giving him a laundry list of reasons why she was leaving, including his lack of respect, lack of compassion, and his controlling tendencies. As Michelle noted to 2020 about the relationship, quote, "It was not salvageable. And frankly, it was getting worse." NorthJersey.com reported that Angela had texted her sister Lisa and cousin Brooke about James's, quote, "strange behavior" and his threat to, quote, "beat her and the guy up." That would be Bakari Burns. And this was just a bridge too far for Lisa, who texted back, quote, "So now he's threatening you. So how long will it take for your eyes to be opened? I pray you don't wait for him to bring you harm." Both Lisa and Brooke urged Angela to file a police report, but Angela just couldn't bring herself to do it, texting, quote, "Most likely I will, though I'm a little confused by what he said initially." Abusers will do this, by the way, make you doubt yourself, try to confuse things. Classic manipulation tactic. Lisa says to 2020 that Angela couldn't decide whether she should stay or go. On the one hand, she needed a place to live, and I don't know if she'd sold her brownstone or if it was being rented out, or maybe she just wanted to stay in Montclair. But she's also concerned about the family, such as it was, and what impact that might have on Alana. She wanted to buy a house, but as NorthJersey.com reported, Lisa told her sister, "Don't wait. Move into a short-term rental while she house hunted." Angela did not want to move twice. On October 21st, 2023, Angela's cousin Brooke had had enough, texting, quote, "Y'all are just dragging this out." To which Angela responded, quote, "You think so?" Meanwhile, James seems to be very slowly, very surely, as Brooke Dean had put it, unraveling. He begins to research GPS trackers, spy cams. He's psycho-texting Angela, obsessed with where she is, what she's doing, who is she with. He even sits on the bed watching her sleep all night, and Angela shares that on one occasion, he chokes her. NorthJersey.com reports that Angela's texts show that she seemed to feel bad about leaving him, that whenever she tried to bring up the topic of separation, quote, he starts throwing a fit and crying. Further texting, quote, "I feel sorry for him because he really seems to be trying. I find it hard to tell him I don't love him." October 23rd, 2018. Angela and James take Alana to school that morning. That same day, Angela has a meeting with a realtor to look at houses. James picks Alana up from school that afternoon and takes her to meet his brother, Robert Ray, and his wife at Longhorn Steakhouse for dinner. It's dark outside, yet James is wearing sunglasses. Robert notices that his brother seems, quote, panicky and on edge, but nevertheless, everyone proceeds inside for dinner. However, James doesn't order anything. He just sips on a glass of water. He asks his brother, who he's not that close to, and therefore Alana isn't either, to watch the little girl for the next 24 hours. He's even packed a few suitcases for her, which he transfers to his brother's car. James takes a photo with Alana, then slips out of the restaurant. Robert tries to stop his brother, but James is gone. So an obvious question at this point is, where's Angela? Robert makes the drive to James's house, thinking his brother must have gone home. The house is dark, and his brother's car isn't in the driveway. Robert feels like he has no choice but to drive home to his house, 70 miles away in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Once back home, Robert unpacks the suitcases that his brother handed over to him. There's a Disney cruise itinerary and 2 certified checks, one for almost $10,000, one for $11,000. There is also a typewritten letter addressed to Robert. And after he reads the letter, he calls 911 to report a murder. Police race to the house where James and Angela live, and they find guns everywhere. They're on the floor, the coffee table. There's even a gun cleaning kit out in the living room. They find a trail of blood from the couch in the living room to the kitchen, and it leads them to the body of Angela Bledsoe. Angela Bledsoe was 44 years old. Cops have to find James Ray, but he's got a considerable head start on them. As Lieutenant Charles Cunningham of the Montclair Police Department bluntly stated in 2020, quote, public enemy number one was James Ray. As authorities launch a search for James, investigators examine the crime scene for clues as to what happened. There's a wall clock on the floor of the kitchen that stopped at 11:15, which would have been that morning, so it's presumed that that was the time of the shooting. In the letter that James wrote to his brother, he admits to killing Angela, but says it was self-defense, that Angela pointed a gun at him and he was defending himself against her. So there's a lot of information to sift through in this letter, and James asserts that, quote, I am scared and I don't want the long burden of a trial to prove my point. Michelle Miller, who's the assistant prosecutor for Essex County, astutely noted to 2020, quote, if someone's acting in self-defense, why would they run? That's somebody looking to get out of town after they committed a brutal homicide. Now, James, remember, he is a former NYPD cop, former military. He's even had martial arts training. This is not your average Joe Dokes off the street. He knows his way around weapons. He knows how to calm down a situation, not escalate it. And Angela's family says that she didn't know anything about guns. So his assertion that she came at him with one of his guns, it just sounds, excuse my French, ridiculous. As Michelle Miller tells 2020, quote, when you look at his background, what you know about police officers, what you know about military personnel, what you know about people trained in the martial arts is that they're trained to diffuse situations. But he chose deadly force. To be clear, the evidence at the crime scene does not support a self-defense defense. Angela's fingerprints aren't on the gun. There's no blood. There's no gunshot residue on her hands. Things have been moved. Frankly, the crime scene looks staged to investigators. And again, James used to be a cop, so how many crime scenes did he see? He knows that they're going to look for gunshot residue on her hands. He knows that they're going to look at the trajectory of the bullets. He absolutely knows that the evidence will not support what he's saying. I mean, you cannot make this make sense. Sorry. As reporter Julia Martin says to 2020, quote, he did not have his ducks in a row. No, he does not. In addition, there were 4 shots fired at Angela Bledsoe. One lodged in the cushions of the living room couch, while the other 3 hit her. One in the back, one in the chest, one in the head. Also, the trail of blood starts in the living room and ends in the kitchen where Angela is found. And the evidence suggests that she was sitting on the couch when the first shot was fired and missed her, and that she gets up and runs to the kitchen, then was shot in the back. Michelle Miller tells 2020 that the angle of the shot in the head indicates that Angela was being fired upon from above. Authorities ramp up their pursuit of James, who by now has been missing for a week. Everyone is on edge, especially Angela's family, wondering if maybe they're next. And Bakari Burns, the man that Angela was having an affair with, well, he's not sleeping so easily at night either, since remember, James threatened to take a little visit to Florida to see the guy. He goes into hiding temporarily while James is at large. So authorities trigger a red notice, which is essentially an international watch list. By now, the FBI is involved and they get a tip that James was in Mexico. He had managed to make it to Mexico undetected, but then he had booked a flight to Cuba. And so because his passport's been flagged, that's how they find him. So once he gets to Cuba, authorities move in and arrest him. FBI Special Agent Brandon Lackey flew down to Cuba to bring James back to the States, and he told 2020, quote, I could best describe his demeanor as a mix of a little bit of surprise and a little bit of relief. NewJersey.com reported that James claimed that this whole flight to Cuba was just so he could, quote, clear his head, as a murder suspect does, and that he planned to come back in early December. Sure, Jan. By the way, Cuba does not have an extradition treaty with the U.S., so clearly he figured that even if authorities did find him, oh well, too bad, so sad, I can just chill here in Cuba forever. Not gonna happen. Relief ripples across New Jersey and Angela's family at the news of James's capture and arrest. So when James is apprehended and his belongings are searched, authorities find a road atlas, a bunch of cash, a change of clothes, and an 18-page handwritten diary where he is documenting his version of events. Reporter Julia Martin commented to 2020 that James is, quote, writing this kind of like an adventure story. Catherine Ramsland, who is a forensic psychologist, tells 2020, quote, there's no sense of being disturbed by what he's done. It's very calculated. James is so enamored with his storytelling prowess, which he even calls himself Jack in this thing, like everybody's got a character name. But he declares in this thing that this should be published as a book. Like he thinks it's going to be some kind of blockbuster, bestseller, with half of the proceeds going to Alana, as if she would want to profit from a story about her father killing her mother. Investigators start to fill in the blanks of what happened on the last morning of Angela's life and what James was up to in the time between fleeing New Jersey and getting picked up in Cuba. So in James's choose your own adventure version of what happened, he and Angela dropped Alana off at school on the morning of October 23rd. He says that on the way home, they began to discuss their faltering relationship and that she was, quote, in a tirade. He says she got emotional, then taunted him that nobody in her family even liked him. James goes on to write that after they got home, Angela went to run some errands, and since he was alone in the house, he decided to clean his guns. He says he took them out of his safe, laid them on the coffee table, and then went to use the bathroom. He claims that Angela returned home early and that he heard her call out to him, and then he came out of the bathroom to find Angela sitting on the couch with one of the guns in her hand. He writes that once again, she goes on a tirade, listing all of the things wrong with him, wrong with the relationship, and he claims that he tried to defuse the situation, but that she was just in a rage, that she refused to listen to him, refused to talk, refused to put the gun down, and that it made him feel, quote, nervous and scared and out of options. James writes that he's got one eye on her, one eye toward reaching for another one of the guns that are laying out, and that he manages to grab it and fire at her, believing, he says, that he missed her. He claims that he took cover in the bathroom and waited for what he described as an eternity before finally coming out of the bathroom to find her once again waiting for him, the gun pointed in his direction. Now, if he's in the bathroom for a so-called eternity and Angela was, in his words, ranting and raving and emotional, I highly doubt that she would be sitting calmly outside of the door waiting for him. She would likely be banging on the door, screaming, maybe even shooting at the door, trying to get at him. I mean, it just sounds ridiculous, his version of events, but at any rate, he said that he took a step toward Angela and that he was, in his words, he could not stop firing. And then she was dead. He says upon realizing what he'd done, he felt his only option was to take himself out too. That he would lay down next to Angela, take his own life, and that they would be found there together. Okay. He says the only thing that stopped him from carrying out this mission was his desire to make sure that his daughter was taken care of. So from the hours of 11:30 to 4:30, James is busy doing just that. As forensic psychologist Catherine Ramsland noted to 2020, James, quote, kept being distracted from this idea that he was going to kill himself, too. With a dead Angela laying on the kitchen floor in a pool of her own blood, James spends these hours writing his will, conducting banking transactions, writing letters to his brother before he goes to pick up Alana from school. And he also booked a Disney cruise during that time. After he picks up Alana, he calls his oldest daughter, Chelsea, and leaves her a very upbeat voicemail, telling her he loves her, he just wanted to hear her voice, then asks her for what he calls a big favor, which is for her to get to know her little sister, Alana. Alana can be heard in the background thanking Chelsea for a gift that I guess Chelsea had given her previously. James then calls his son and leaves him a cheery voicemail as well. He then calls a female friend and talks to her for about an hour, and he's recording it. During the conversation, he lists his many grievances with Angela, including her being rightfully upset that he was MIA during the pregnancy. He's indignant about this because, didn't she realize he was married? To paraphrase the late, great Rick James, audacity is a hell of a drug. He is upset that Angela is making plans to Vominos. And again, he sounds kind of shocked and indignant about it. They're always shocked. I wonder if so Angela was his side dish, right? While he's still married, and it was like he had the best of both worlds. And then Angela gets pregnant, and now he's cooked. It changes everything. And then the wife pieces out because she doesn't want to be dealing with this. And so James is like, oh, well, okay, Angela, move in. But then it turns out that he and Angela, they don't really love each other. And then, oh, she's cheating on him. So now he's humiliated. He's the one who's doing the humiliating, right? And now she's leaving. He's going to be left alone. His entire life blown up for what? And he's got to be thinking, WTF, this chick just flipped the script on me. And this is not how any of this was supposed to happen. And what the F am I going to do now? And okay, anyway, I've digressed enough. So throughout his entire bitch session, James neglects to mention that he's just killed Angela and that he's on the run. Just important details to neglect. He tells this woman that he might have to fly to Ethiopia and implores her to support his brother and Alana. She, not knowing that he's killed Angela, agrees. And then James disappears. As James writes, and I promise this is pulled directly from his narrative, I did not make this up. Quote, after the tragic course of events, a 6-day road trip was underway to arrive at my planned destination of obscurity. No, really, he wrote that himself. In one of the few strategic moves that he makes throughout this odyssey, James ditches his car, takes a taxi to Philly that he pays cash for. Remember when you had to pay cash for a taxi? Okay, anyway, I'm digressing again. But he winds up, he says, sleeping in, I guess, on a homeless camp in Philly's Chinatown neighborhood before eventually hitchhiking to Mexico and then onward to Cuba, where he's caught. COVID delays the start of James's trial by almost 5 years. But on March 29, 2003, his trial finally commences. One of the most compelling witnesses to take the stand was his brother, who testified for the prosecution. Robert Ray testified that calling police to report what his brother's letter said was the right thing to do, something I'm betting James was not exactly counting on. The defense tries to paint Angela as a gold-digging opportunist, that she was the controlling one, and that James was just this hapless, henpecked boyfriend being cuckolded by this Jezebel. And the defense maintains that James acted in self-defense, that he, quote, couldn't stop firing at the violent, out-of-control Angela. It was her or me. Chris Keating of News 12 New Jersey notes to 2020, quote, there's one person that's claiming he could do nothing else but fire at her to save his own life, but there's much more to it. Indeed. The crime scene expert that the prosecution hired, Howard Ryan, testified that the evidence simply did not support a self-defense theory, saying, quote, based on the evidence, she was trying to get away and he gunned her down from behind. The trial lasts 7 weeks, and after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury agrees with the prosecution. James is found guilty of the murder of Angela Bledsoe. Unfortunately, the story does not end there. 2 days after his conviction, days ahead of his scheduled sentencing, where life without the possibility of parole is on the table, on June 18th, 2023, Father's Day, ironically, James is found unconscious in his cell. Narcan, which is typically used to treat an overdose, was administered, and he was rushed to University Hospital in Newark, where he was pronounced dead. James R. Ray III was 60 years old. So because James died before his sentencing in New Jersey, his murder conviction was overturned, which is crazy. An autopsy report on the official cause of death remains pending, though James's defense team asserts their client died from an overdose and have demanded a full investigation into his death. Angela's sister Lisa is raising Alana. Alana is a cheerleader, an honor student, and by all accounts, thriving. Michelle Miller, the assistant prosecutor who prosecuted James, finds what Alana had to endure to be one of the most difficult aspects of this tragedy, telling 2020, quote, that was a disturbing aspect of the case. A minor child, 6 years old at the time, picked up by her father and never went home. She never saw her mother again. She ended up going to Allentown, Pennsylvania with 2 people she barely knew, and after her father walked out, she never saw him again either. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to be notified about new episodes, and you can also find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus material and other fun stuff. Learn more about my suspense novels about the dark side of love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.